Welcome to the third of NSAI's Knowledge Transfer series of webinars. This is a simple introductory guide to CE marking, providing a simplified interpretation of EU legislation for medical devices. My name is Mary White and I am head of NSAI's Brexit unit. The series covers what you need to know about CE marking for your products, the different roles and responsibilities of economic operators, the main information you need to know about EU legislation, how Brexit will impact on CE marking and what you can do to protect your business. Today, we will look at legislation covering medical device products. I will be referring to two different types of legislation, directives such as the Medical Device Directive and regulation such as the In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Device Regulation. Regulations are EU legal acts that come into force automatically on a particular date, either a date set in the regulation or the date that is published in the official journal of the EU. They don't need to be transposed into national law by any member state. They are binding in their entirety on all member states. There are no derogations. Directive is a legal act of the European Union which requires member states to achieve a particular result without dictating the means of achieving that result. It can be distinguished from regulations, which are self-executing and do not require any implementing measures. Member states must transpose it into a national law or regulation which achieves the result set out in the directive by a certain date. Member states who do not do so can be the subject of infringement proceedings and may ultimately be subject to penalties. EU acknowledges that member states have different legal systems, processes and traditions, and allow countries to apply the directive in a manner that is compatible with these. However, for practical purposes, there is very little difference between regulations and directives for manufacturers seeking to CE mark their products. There are 32 different pieces of EU legislation covering manufactured products currently in force. 10 of these are regulations and 22 are directives. In terms of medical devices, there are 2 regulations and 3 directives. Any medical device that has a USB connector must also comply with the EMC directive listed here, and for medical devices that emit radio waves, they must comply with the Radio Equipment Directive. Further details on these 2 directives can be found on our EU legislation webinar for electrical products. Medical devices is also referred to in the Personal Protective Equipment Regulation 425, which was updated in 2016. Here is a brief summary of the 6 steps to CE marking products, which we covered in the first presentation in the series. The final step, Step 6, draws up the Declaration of Conformity and it attaches the CE mark to your product. Now, this Declaration of Conformity is a legal document where the manufacturer declares that the product meets the requirements of the regulation. And here is a brief roadmap of how the system works. The EU drafts the directive or regulation which sets out the basic requirements which must be met to place the product on the EU market. Then, number 2, you show that your product meets the requirements of the regulation by showing that it meets the standards associated with the regulation. Step number 3, for some products you are required to use an independent notified body to assess conformity of your products. Then finally, you make the declaration of conformity, that the product meets the requirements of the regulation, and then the CE mark can be applied to the product. In terms of market surveillance, you must check that products placed on the market meet the requirements of the regulation. Medical devices are currently covered by 5 directives and regulations, the 3 older directives and the 2 new regulations. We are currently transitioning to the medical device regulations, which will replace the active implantable medical devices and medical device directives. COVID has had an impact on this sector, and the 2 MDDs were to be withdrawn in May 2020, but the EU have extended this by 12 months. The In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Device Directive will be withdrawn in May 2022 and will be replaced by the In Vitro Diagnostic medical device regulation. In Ireland, the Health Products Regulatory Authority, HPRA, is the competent authority for the regulation of medical devices. In the UK, its equivalent is the MHRA. Now, 2 years ago, the MHRA had stated that they would recognise the CE mark for medical devices for 2 years post-Brexit. Currently, we do not know if this is still the case at the end of the year. Their website now states that they are going to produce a guidance document. Medical devices are some of the most highly regulated manufactured products in the EU, reflecting the catastrophic impact on people's health if they go wrong. There are additional requirements for manufacturers CE marking their devices under the directives and regulations. Manufacturers must register with the competent authority in the member state in which they are based, which in Ireland is the HPRA. Non-EU manufacturers must appoint an authorised representative based in the EU member state who carry out key responsibilities on their behalf, including registering with the competent authority. They must register all medical devices with the competent authority in the designated language of the member state in which they are being registered. The Global Medical Device Nomenclature is an international standardized nomenclature to accurately describe and catalogue medical devices and other healthcare products. The appropriate GMDN code must be used for all devices being registered. GMDN will be replaced under the MDR by the EMDN or European Medical Device Nomenclature System. Notified bodies carry out conformity assessment of medical devices as part of the CE marking process. There are over 55 notified bodies covering the 3 medical device directives and less than 15 notified bodies covering the medical device regulation, but NSAI is the only one based in Ireland. There are strict requirements concerning labelling and product information. These cover the manufacturer's details and those of the authorised representative and importer for devices manufactured outside the EU, the product details and instructions for use. All of the information must be given in the languages required by the member state in which they are being put on the market. The languages for Ireland are English and Irish. For example, you are not allowed to put a device on the Irish market where the information is only given in German or French. An extensive vigilance system was set up under the medical device directives to minimise risks to the safety of patients, users and others. An adverse incident is an event during use of the device which might lead to or might have led to death of a patient or user or of other persons or to a serious deterioration in their state of health. Adverse event reporting requirements must be followed as outlined in the MDD or MDR as applicable, and associated guidance documents. Personal protective equipment, PPE, is any device or appliance that is worn or held by an individual for the protection against one or more health and safety hazards. Specialist PPE used in a medical or surgical setting, such as surgical masks, medical gloves, and surgical drapes and gowns, are subject to regulations covering medical devices. The EU Commission has responded to the COVID pandemic to help increase supplies of PPE, and Commission Recommendation EU 2020/403 outlines what actions can be taken to increase supplies, particularly from manufacturers in third countries who do not normally CE mark their products. In line with other EU standards bodies, NSAI is giving access free of charge to key standards covering PPE to support manufacturers producing PPE for the first time. We've also produced a guide to manufacturing and importing personal protective equipment and medical devices. The guide and the standards can be found on the NSAI website along with other COVID-19 resources. Here is a quick summary of the notifying authorities, accreditation bodies, notified bodies located in Ireland, and market surveillance authorities for the directives and regulations referenced in this presentation. The HPRA is the designating authority for all medical device regulations. It accredits notified bodies for medical devices and carries out market surveillance, including auditing on medical device manufacturers. NSAI is the only notified body in Ireland for medical devices. The low voltage directive is different to the others as products are certified by the manufacturer. This means that there is no need for notified bodies notification to the EU Commission or accreditation. However, INAB does accredit the test laboratories which manufacturers use when certifying their products. Market surveillance is carried out by the CCPC, which is the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. The Commission for Communications Regulation, usually referred to as ComReg, is the notifying authority and carries out market surveillance for both the EMC and the RED directives. INAB accredits notifying bodies and test laboratories for both directives. There are 115 notified bodies for the EMC directive, 3 of which are found in Ireland: Compliance Engineering, SafeNet and Cronage Veritas, and 83 notified bodies for the Radio Equipment Directive, 2 of which are in Ireland: Compliance Engineering and CTI SEM. The Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation, which has been changed to Enterprise, Trade and Employment, is the notifying authority for the PPE Directive, and INAB is the accreditation authority. There are 111 EU notified bodies, 2 of which are in Ireland: SATRA and CCQS, and CCPC and the Health and Safety Authority carry out market surveillance on different classes of PPE. The Blue Guide is a comprehensive guide for the operation of the EU single market for manufactured products. Regulation 765 established the legal basis for accreditation and market surveillance and consolidated the meaning of the CE marking, and Decision 768 updated, harmonised and consolidated the various technical instruments already used in existing Union harmonisation legislation. The latest Blue Guide, published in 2016, builds on the content of the original guide first published in 2000. This new version of the guide includes new chapters on the obligations of economic operators and accreditation, and completely revised chapters on standardisation and market surveillance. It is available on the EU Commission website, and see the link below here. Thank you for your attention. I hope I have simplified and demystified EU legislation for industrial products. If you require any additional information, please contact me, Mary White, at nsai.ie.